Hi guys, it's Raythe here. I would like to welcome you to a new mini-series called Raythe Reads Chapter 1. I have many more gay romantic stories than just Dragon's Reign and Empire of Stars, so I thought I'd read the first chapters of some of them so you can get to know more of my characters and worlds. Before I read you the first chapter of the Elven King's Blade, please keep in mind I am only reading Chapter 1. If you want to read the rest, it's only available as a written web serial on my website, raythereign.com. This is a paid website that I set up before Patreon even existed, and your subscription not only lets you read everything I write, completed stories and ongoing ones, it supports the team so we can keep doing free podcasts just like Dragon's Reign. Chapter 1. Time is a river. A single drop of blood pattered down on the paper Elven King Athaden Undriel held. He swiftly brushed one long-fingered hand over the perfect crimson circle. It smeared across the pure white paper and stained his skin. He quickly brought the document close to his chest with one hand, while discreetly pressing the other against his nose to stop any more blood from flowing. Perhaps no one had seen him bleeding. Perhaps, even if they had, they would think it was because the season had been remarkably dry. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't the start of the Black Sleep. He was perfectly fine, even though his 1000th year had passed. The year when he should have been bound to his blade, but was not, because there are no blades left. The mere thought of his missing blade had the mark on his shoulder and neck throb like a severed limb. The mark had been a blessing and a curse, since it had appeared at his birth and spread over the years, becoming what looked like a tattoo to most eyes in soft blues and purples. The mark told him that he had a blade, a preternaturally strong and gifted elven warrior who would match his magic with steel, and who would bear the same mark. The mark meant that a blade existed somewhere that was his. He just had to find him before it was too late. Athaden slammed down that thought process. He would not despair. That was simply not useful. He drew his finger from his nose. On the back of his pointer finger was a faint trace of blood, but it was already drying. Nothing to worry about. His purple-eyed gaze swept the circular council table to check if any of his counselors was looking at him. Lord Tizic Parn was droning on about expected crop yields, as if he did not even find it exciting. But to Parn, crops were a passion. It was just his reading voice that made it sound like he was in pain. Most of the rest of his counselor were desperately trying to stay awake. Their heads were bobbing like heavy blooms and slender stems as Parn detailed how well the cern was growing or the stamen fruit. All except for two. The first of these was his best friend, Lord Halidin Morgana. Halidin was not seated at the council table, as he was not one of the 12 official counselors from the largest houses of the Valor Elven clans. Halidin's house was a minor one, but that had never mattered to Athaden. They were age mates and had, upon first meeting on accident in an orchard, both of them avoiding their studies, been inseparable. Some had thought it was a love match, and had hoped, though Morgana's family held no blade blood, that somehow he would be able to hold off the Black Sleep from taking Athaden, like it had his parents and every other Undriel. But theirs had always been a friendship at the core, not a romance, and Halidin, for all his strengths, courage, and nobility, was no blade. But he knew Athaden down to his bones, and was as protective as a blade could ever have been. Halidin clearly had seen the blood, and his best friend didn't think it was from the weather. Athaden could see that he was about to call the meeting to a close so that Athaden could rest, though he normally resisted giving any quarter to the weakness that plagued him almost daily now. He would welcome sleep at that moment. He was so very tired. His bones ached. His eyes burned from exhaustion. Even the long platinum hair on his head felt too heavy to be borne. He just wanted to lie down and let unconsciousness take him into her embrace. But he could not show even the slightest hint of these feelings, because the second person in the room would notice the blood. While Halidin watched him out of concern, Lady Raythe watched him to find an advantage. Their eyes met, her green to his purple. She dropped her gaze to the stained paper half crumpled in his left hand, a hand that he had not realized was trembling with strain. He stilled the movement, but it was too late. When she looked up into his eyes again, there was triumph on her face. She spoke then, interrupting Parn with her incisive, crisp voice. "King Athodin, I would like to discuss your research and bringing back the blades and freeing your relatives from the Black Sleep. This council has heard little, and even less, of that was definite." Parn's mouth paused in mid-syllable. Heads that had been going towards resting on the table jerked up. Halidin's golden eyes narrowed and his mouth thinned in anger. Athodin held himself very still. "My research is coming along," he answered her stiffly. It wasn't coming along. It was at a complete standstill, but he would never tell her this. "Are you any forwarder in finding out where the blades disappeared to? Whose magic took them all at once? Who could make them disappear without a trace? The Riven?" The counselor stirred uneasily at the name of the beings that had been their ancient enemy for so long. To speak their name was to risk them hearing you and coming. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. Her green eyes were fixed upon him. "And even if we assume it was them, for who else hates us so much and has enough power to accomplish this, why would they simply whisk the blades away to a place they can be recovered from? Why not just kill them all?" Parn shuffled his papers, opening and closing his mouth, clearly wanting to read the rest of his report despite the drama in the room. The others' gazes were darting between him and Raythe. Halidin opened his mouth to call her to order, but Athodin made a slight movement that silenced his friend. If he did not defend himself, it would be a weakness in Raythe's eyes. Her kin valued strength above all things. They were gifted warriors, nothing like the blades, but still the ones they had relied upon since all the blades had vanished just after his birth. If the blades were dead, then the Undereels would not simply be asleep. They would die too. You know this, Lady Nor, he pointed out. In the past, when a blade has died, so has the Undereel he or she protected. She nodded. "Quite right. So perhaps it is not the Riven who have done this. Killing all the Undereels is their goal, so it makes no sense they would hold back." It was the bucolic Lord Radish Cern who blustered out. "What is the point of speaking of this now, Lady Nor? There have been no attacks by the Riven in an age. They might be the ones dead and gone for all we know, or uninterested in having the Guardian turn them to ash yet again in their futile quest to take over our lands." Radish gave her a condescending smile, which, if Athodin hadn't loathed Raythe, would have had him reprimanding the elf for his rudeness. Raythe, though, did not even flicker an eyelash. She did not directly address Radish either. Her gaze was upon Athodin alone. "Your 1,000th year has passed, King Athodin," she said, her voice low. Athodin placed his right hand below the table, out of eyesight, and dug his fingernails into the soft skin of his palm. It helped him focus and not rise to the bait of her words. "Yes," he gave her a tight smile. "All of the Valor celebrated it with me, so I'm well aware of my age, or lack thereof, which is your point," he added silently. He'd held the throne since his 500th year, when his parents had finally succumbed to the Black Sleep and had to be placed into the white stone sarcophagi that protected their still alive, but seemingly lifeless bodies. He was the youngest king to ever hold the throne of the Valor. He only did so because he was the last Undereel. There had been unrest at the thought of one so very young and untested ruling them at first. But the Undereels have ruled the Valor since time immemorial, he reminded himself silently. It was unthinkable to do anything else but crown me. Yet Raythe had made sure that every moment of every day of every month, year, decade, and century that had passed, that she did not believe that his was a valid reign. He was only there because of his last name, because he alone could summon the guardian to protect the Valor if the Riven invaded them again, which was galling, because he did not consider the kingship a prize. In his mind, his father was king, and his mother was queen forever. Once he woke them, and he would find a way. He would cede all control to them again, as it should be. He longed to study magic, and lose himself in the forests and fields of Valor, but that was not to be. Instead, he was burdened with a kingdom after having watched those who mattered most to him fall asleep and never wake. He was granted power he had not sought, but had taken it on himself because of duty, because of that last name Raythe seemed to think gave him unearned favors, while he saw it as only giving him burdens. Raythe shifted in her chair. She wore the green and silver armor of her house, which matched her eyes. Her red hair was cut short, so that when she donned her helmet, it would not get in her way. A scar, long and white and thin, crossed over her right eyebrow and cheek. Not even the natural quick healing of the elves or their skilled healers had been able to completely put her back together again. A gnarl had caught her with one of its poison-tipped claws before she had disemboweled it. She had saved many Valor that day with her bravery. He tried not to wish she had died doing it. "You should have been bonded to your blade 7 years ago," she reminded him, as if he did not count the minutes since it should have happened himself. Halidin's lips writhed back from his teeth, and this time, no warning look from Athelin could stop him from speaking. King Athelin's parents lasted over 500 years before they succumbed to the Black Sleep. You think a mere 7 is something to worry about? Is that your point? That is your point, is it not, Raythe? Halidin was not going to use her title. His older brother, Ryan, had faced Raythe in the warrior's circle. They had been evenly skilled, but she was willing to do anything to win. She'd been on her back. Ryan was standing over her triumphant. He had reached down to help her up, having won the match. But just before the judge called it, she had swept his legs out from under him and used his proffered helping hand to get him on his back and place a blade to his throat. She was called the winner, but many thought she simply had no honor. So Halidin had reasons outside of her present behavior towards him to hate her. But again, Raythe's gaze remained unmoving from him. He felt another drop of blood forming in his nose. He knew it would start to fall any moment. He used a thin stream of magic to keep it from doing so. Our beloved Ferathia and Sivrathel were elves of long years. Her speaking his parents' name was almost an agony for his ears. They had built up stores of strength from the eons they had spent with their blades. In contrast, until King Athelin, no Undriel has ever gone a day beyond their 1,000th year without being bonded. If that age truly meant nothing, then why would it be enforced so firmly? She was right, of course. The moment that his 1,000th year had passed, he had started to weaken. His magic did not come as quickly to him as it had before, and he was exhausted after having performed the simplest spells. And then the general tiredness had started sapping his limbs of strength, making it so that he could no longer take rides in the woods that he loved, or swim in the lake under the silvery moons. Slowly, but surely, he had been reduced to staying in the palace and moving between his bed and his workroom. He hid this all from his counselors, from his people, but evidently it had not escaped Raythe's keen observational skills. Are you suggesting that our king is weak? Halidin slammed a hand down on the table. She lowered her head. Of course not. I recognize how valiant our king has been and is. He has taken on tasks that an elf much older than himself would be daunted by. I am merely suggesting that perhaps he needs some assistance. Did you know that we not only have a growing YouTube channel where you can see official artwork, trailers, and more, but there is an awesome fan-run Discord as well. The Discord channel has hundreds of members, and there's always something going on. Links to both the YouTube and Discord are in the description. Every scholar and mage in the land is working on the problem of the blades with me, Athelin responded mildly. Are you offering some kind of additional assistance? She placed a hand on the center of her armored chest. I am no scholar. I would put myself in a false position to pretend to be. I was merely offering to assist in the defense of the realm. How would you do this more than you already are? He asked. That House Nor would be named Protector, and House Torin take over the running of the council and other day-to-day matters of the kingdom. She inclined her head towards Lord Ares Torin, who sat opposite her. Athelin's gaze swung towards Ares, and he realized that 3 people had been very aware of him during the council meeting, and not just 2. He felt a stabbing pain over his heart. It was not a physical pain, but a mental one. Ares had been his father's best friend. He had played the role that Halidin did for Athelin. You wish to be king, Ares? He asked, his voice sounding thin and strange to his own ears. He used not honorifics because Ares was like an uncle to him, and now Ares might have just betrayed him. One might have heard a pin drop in the silence of the room after his words. Ares was a powerful figure. He stood several inches taller than Athelin. His jet-black hair and eyes were an unusual combination in the velour. Some of the uneducated had whispered he had Riven blood, but that was absurd. He folded his hands on the table. No, Athelin, I do not. But I do want to help you more than anything, he answered. His voice was low and cool. Time is not an unending river for an Undriel who is not bound to his blade. You need to concentrate on finding yours, or finding the answer to where the other blades went. Anything that distracts you from this task should be taken on by another who can. Every word was like a dagger in his heart, not because what Ares was saying was incorrect, but that he was finally saying what many must have been thinking, what Athelin was thinking when he didn't school his thoughts. But why hadn't Ares come to him in private? Why wait to a council meeting to broach this? But then his thoughts went back to the weeks and months preceding this meeting. Ares had tried to broach it, but had backed off every time he had reacted negatively. Athelin felt the trickle of blood in his nose and panic seized him. Ares had seen the blood and knew what it meant. You alone can find the blades. Let Ares run the kingdom and House Nor defend it while you focus on that task, Raythe said. Theirs was either treason or truly meant offer. His reaction would determine how it was taken. If he showed anger, if he showed himself affronted by their offer, he would look weak. At the same time, if he did not rebuke them, he would also look weak. They had put him in a trick box. His gaze met Ares. Those black eyes looked into his with only sadness. I remember similar offers being made to me before I took the crown, he said, his voice smooth and even, showing none of the strain or anger or betrayal he felt. The hand he clenched in his lap was going numb. I turned all of them down then when my parents' loss was fresh in my heart. Yes, an eager light appeared in Raythe's eyes, and she leaned yet further towards him. But then you were intent on proving your worth to the Undriel name, and you have done that. But time is growing short to find an answer to the disappearance of the blades. The Riven have not appeared in an age, Radish rumbled again, angry that his earlier statement had seemingly been ignored. Indeed, you are correct, she said with a nod of her head, which means that others can defend our people while the king spends his precious time looking into the matter of the blades. Once the Undriels are restored, Athelin, Ares said, his voice still comforting despite what he was saying, the throne will be theirs again. I do not want it for me. I want it for you. The silence that fell in the council chambers was deafening. Halidin looked ready to lunge for Raythe or Ares' throats, while the other council members merely looked perturbed. What you are saying makes sense on some level, Athelin found himself saying. He almost sounded amused. This caused a sharp intake of breath to come from one of the counselors, but he did not bother to check who had done it. Raythe's eyes gleamed as if she couldn't believe her luck. But it would be the wrong move. That had Raythe jerking back in her chair. Ares merely lowered his head and stared at the table, as if he had expected Athelin to say nothing less. Athelin continued, The Riven are not gone.
They merely bide their time. I can feel them beyond the mountains. Whether or not they are behind the loss of the blades is irrelevant. They know what it means that there is only one Undreer left. He was the one to lean forward now. His eyes were glowing with power. He willed them to. He would pay for using his strength so wildly like this, but it had to be done. If I were to cede even an ounce of power to you or anyone else, Lady Nor or Lord Hitorin, the Riven would know. And they would come again, bringing plague, death, and darkness in their wake. That would be a greater distraction to me than the running of this country. That would ensure I could not spend my other precious time on finding an answer to the blade's disappearance. Everyone at the table was very still. The Undreals rule the Valor for a reason, Lady Nor, Lord Hitorin. We are the only ones that can keep the Riven at bay. So your offer, no matter how generously or selflessly given, cannot be accepted. Even if I need your help, he thought silently. He stood up, firming his legs beneath him, even as they practically wanted to go out, and gave her a thin sliver of a smile. Now, I have my research to attend to. Lord Parn, excellent report. Parn jerked and crumpled his precious report. Oh, yes, thank you, King Athodin. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Without a further word, Athodin turned on his heel and headed into the private areas of the palace. He should go to his bedroom and rest. That show of power and that thin trickle of magic he was using to stem the tide of blood in his nose, it drained him down to the dregs. It was pitiful. It was more than that. It was dangerous for him to be so weak. Yet on shaking legs, he headed instead into the crypt where his family lay in eternal slumber, unless he could bring back the blades from wherever they had disappeared to. He stumbled down the white stone staircase that curled like petals around his central stem. His feet found their way of their own accord to the twin sarcophagi that held his parents. The sarcophagi were also of pure white stone. The crypt was eternally illuminated by pure, clean light from an everglow crystal. The light was similar to that of sunlight, a sun that would never set on the Undreals. His parents, Firathia and Cyrivil Undreal, had ruled for longer than any Undreals before them. They had beaten back the Riven and ushered in an era of peace unheard of for the Valor. During their rule, it had seemed like everything was possible. Or so he had heard. He had been born after the blades had vanished. One night, the blades had been there, and the next, they were simply gone. Not every blade and Undreal will love mates, as his parents showed, but they were closer than kin to each Undreal. He laid his shaking hands on the sarcophagi, one on each lid, and closed his eyes. How I miss you, he whispered to them. You've no idea how heavy each day is without your voices, your smiles, and your love. I try to do right by our people, but I fear. His throat seized around the words. I fear I am failing. You are not failing, my king. Halidin's noble voice broke over him. Athodin attempted to turn to look at his best friend, but his legs simply gave out beneath him. Athodin! Halidin caught him around the waist and lowered him gently to the ground with his back resting against his mother's sarcophagus. Let me get a healer. Do not move. No! Athodin grasped his best friend's arms with surprising strength. He was desperate for no one else to see the show of extreme weakness. But Athodin, a healer will not help, my dearest friend. Athodin got out. He tasted blood flowing down his throat. Since he had not allowed it to flow out of his nose, it went the other direction. The sweet, coppery taste of it filled his mouth, and he felt sick. Halidin's expression was anguished, his skin white as chalk, his lips parted in an O of empathetic pain, and his whole body was rigid with the desire to move, to do something, anything to help Athodin. But he could not. There was nothing he could do. I must do something, Halidin cried, echoing what his body language had already told Athodin so eloquently. Athodin smiled genuinely. Sit with me. Stay with me a moment. I will stay with you forever. But it was only with reluctance that Halidin settled down on the ground, but not before he took off his long coat and put it over Athelden's more slender form. The warmth and scent of him flowed over the Elven King. He let his eyelids flutter shut for a moment, relishing the sense of love and safety this brought him. Ares and Raythe are right, Athelden said after a moment. What? No, you are the one who is right. What you said about the Riven attacking if you were to back down from your duties is true, Halidin cried. I cannot believe that Lord Torin suggested it at all. Raythe is always looking for a way to win. But him? It is madness. You must remain our king in all ways. Ares and Raythe are correct, and that time is running out for me, Athelden admitted. Strangely, saying the words was almost freeing. I am falling. I feel it. The black sleep reaches for me with lover's arms to drag me down into darkness forever. Halidin made a wounded sound. No, that's not. You can't. We have to do something. The mark shows your blade exists. The mark is proof that your blade is waiting for you, searching for you. I think so too, Athelden agreed, and I have a lead on where my blade may be and why he has not found his way here yet. His heart thumped faster in his chest. Adrenaline gave him slightly more strength. Speaking of his blade always made him excited. He remembered when he was growing up how he had chafed at the idea of being tied to some warrior, a warrior that would not even be his choice. Of course, he believed that just like his parents, his blade would not be his lovemate. If this person was to be sprung upon him, he would keep the blade at arm's length, or further. But when his parents fell into the black sleep, even though Halidin was by his side, he felt that something was missing. It was almost as if he was reaching out, expecting to feel a hand clasp his, only instead of finding air. Since that day, he had felt that loss. His search had become more than just to save his own life and bring back his clan, but to find that missing hand, the one that should be in his. Halidin's golden eyes widened. Where? Tell me, and I will go immediately. You cannot go. Only I can go and return with my blade. Athelden interrupted him. He frowned for a moment, because he thought he saw a shadow on the stairs to the crypt. He sent his magical senses outward, but they came back with nothing. The shadow was gone. Perhaps a trick of the light or his tired eyes. His heart, though, thumped harder as he considered what he was about to tell Halidin. He was about to finally do something active. He was going after his blade, no matter what the cost. What cost is there any longer? Athelden thought. I cannot serve my people like this. I doubt I could call the Guardian in this condition. I am doing the only thing I can by leaving. I do not understand, my king. There's no realm where... Wait. You are not suggesting going to the human realm. The look of disgust and fear that crossed Halidin's face was not unexpected. It is ironic that the realm we sent our exiles to is the realm that may hold our salvation now, Athelden said with a thin smile. My research tells me that at least one blade was sent there after the initial compact between the Undreals and the Blades. You think your blade is in exile? One who betrayed us so badly as to deserve punishment, as to go to the human realm? But I thought living there would drain away our immortality anyways. Halidin objected. He looked as if he smelled something very bad was on his face. In the beginning, the idea of bonding with the Undreals was considered enslavement. To summon the Blades. I can understand this. I felt it myself. We were enemies after all. To bind their lives with ours must have seemed intolerable. Athelden reminded him. There were many rumors about the human realm and humans. If even half of what was said was true about them, it would be a terrible realm indeed. In some ways, he admired the Blades who had gone there, even in his youngest days when he had hated the idea of Blades. He would never have had the courage to actually reject the bonding and go to Earth. He regarded these early exiled Blades not as traitors or criminals, but as proud warriors who would not bend no matter the consequences. As to whether their immortality would fade, Halidin, Blades have such unique gifts, we truly do not know if the human realm would affect them, as it would us. Halidin shook his head. No, I am sorry, but no. I think your lead cannot be true. You could not be bound to such a being as would defy his own kith and kin. His duty, his honor. I refuse to believe it. The thought of how corrupted they must be by living amongst the humans, too. The thought of such a person near you is intolerable. Athodin had thought of this, too. Would his blade have been corrupted by the humans? It was said that humans were so attracted to elves that they had even resorted to eating them in order to devour the elves and make them a part of themselves. Humans were uncouth, without knowledge or art or culture. They were savages that raped, pillaged, and murdered. The blades, though, were unparalleled warriors. They would have fought off the humans and then secreted themselves away from them. That had to be what had happened. But no matter whether his blade was corrupted or not, Athodin needed him. Perhaps even if his blade was affected, simply bonding with Athodin and returning home would fix it. They would have forever to rehabilitate this once noble warrior. No matter what he might find, it was the only viable lead. And he sensed he had no time left. He said as much to his best friend. There are no other choices left to me, Halidin. Halidin looked like someone had stabbed him in the heart. My king! Athodin squeezed his best friend's shoulder. I know, Halidin, but I must go. I must go to the human realm and look for my blade there, or all is lost. I hope you enjoyed this first chapter of The Elven King's Blade. I realize that everyone wants your subscription money these days, but in our case, Raythe Reign and the next podcast are possible only because of our monthly subscribers. If you love Raythe Reign and want to support what we do, why not sign up for a month or two? You'll have a lot more to read, and you'll be making future episodes possible. Thanks, guys.